The arrival of the unknown. The vast silence of the cosmos pressed against the hull of the starship Aetheris, drifting like a silent sentinel in the infinite blackness. The ship, a symbol of human and alien cooperation, hummed with the quiet resonance of its advanced systems. Inside, its crew was busy, going about their duties as if they were preparing for another typical diplomatic mission. But for Marcus Steele, today was anything but typical. He stood in front of his mirror, adjusting the straps on his sleek black armor, the glossy material reflecting the low lights of his quarters. The Aetheris had been chosen as the vessel for this mission, and though Marcus had been part of numerous interstellar projects, there was something different about this one. His assignment was straightforward on paper: escort a delegation of peaceful alien diplomats to a neutral zone for negotiations, but a feeling gnawed at him, a strange sense that this mission was going to test him in ways he hadn't anticipated. Marcus ran his fingers through his short, dark hair, staring at his reflection. As the human assistant to Ambassador Crix, his role was to ensure that the human interests were well represented and secure during the trip. But today, something was off. His gut told him that the days ahead would not be as simple as a diplomatic trip through peaceful space. A feeling of unease washed over him, but he couldn't shake it off. It was as if something, or someone, was about to shake his world in ways he couldn't foresee. His thoughts were interrupted by the soft chime of a doorbell, followed by the hiss of the airlock releasing. Marcus's heart skipped a beat. He wasn't expecting anyone. When the door opened, a figure stepped into the room, silhouetted by the glow of the dim hallway lights. At first, Marcus could barely make out her features, but as she stepped into full view, he felt a sharp, sudden intake of breath. She was like nothing he had ever seen before. Standing before him was Captain Lyra Terran, a warrior from the Xerna species. The Xerna were known across the galaxy for their beauty and lethal skill in combat, but what Marcus felt in her presence was something more, a quiet power that seemed to hang in the air, as though she was more than human. Her skin was a stunning shade of silver, almost iridescent, catching the dim light and turning it into something magical. Her long, platinum hair cascaded down her back like a frozen waterfall, each strand shimmering with an ethereal glow. And her eyes, those piercing, silver eyes, were the most striking feature of all. They didn't just look at him. They seemed to see straight through him, as if reading his very soul. "Marcus Steele," she said, her voice smooth, like silk, yet carrying an undercurrent of authority. "I trust you're prepared for what's to come." Marcus, who had been trained to face intergalactic negotiations and potential danger on countless occasions, found himself momentarily speechless. There was something about her presence that made everything else seem irrelevant. This wasn't just a warrior. She was a living legend among the Xerna, known for her unmatched prowess in battle and her intellect. Her reputation had reached Marcus long before she had stepped into the room. But seeing her now, standing before him, it was as if her reputation paled in comparison to the reality of her presence. "Of course," Marcus said, collecting himself and adjusting his posture. He forced himself to smile and maintain his professional demeanor, though inside, his heart was racing. "I assume you've been briefed on the mission parameters." Lyra's lips curled into a faint smile, but it was a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I know what we are supposed to do: escort the Centurion delegates to the neutral zone and ensure their safety. It seems simple enough, doesn't it?" Marcus nodded, but there was a question that burned in his mind, something he had been meaning to ask. "But you, why are you assigned to this mission? I mean, no offense, but your skill set seems excessive for a diplomatic escort." Lyra's expression darkened for a split second, as if something hidden was momentarily revealed, but she quickly masked it with her usual cool demeanor. "You think too small, Marcus," she replied, her voice like honey laced with a hint of danger. "This mission isn't just about diplomacy. There are forces at play that you and I may not even fully understand yet. But I'm here because I am needed, and I would advise you to trust in that." Before Marcus could respond, A harsh, metallic voice echoed through the ship's intercom system, cutting through the tension like a blade. Attention. Unauthorized vessel detected. Approach vector confirmed. Security protocols engage. Marcus froze, his hand instinctively going to his pulse rifle, a weapon he had always kept close by for moments like this. The Aetheris was a state-of-the-art diplomatic vessel, but that didn't make it immune to attack. A feeling of foreboding settled deep within his chest as the lights in the corridors flickered to a deep crimson hue, signaling the activation of battle protocols. Lyra didn't flinch. She simply moved with a quiet, predatory grace, heading towards the ship's main control center. Get to the armory, Marcus. We may need every weapon we have. Marcus felt his pulse quicken as the enormity of the situation hit him. He had trained for this. Tactical situations, hostile encounters, and diplomatic crises, but nothing in his preparation had ever come close to this. He was about to embark on an entirely new kind of mission, one where survival might depend on the very partner he'd just met. As he followed her down the darkened hallway, the distant hum of the ship's engines and the sudden, chaotic alarms ringing throughout the vessel filled his mind. "What are we dealing with?" he asked. Lyra's eyes never left the control screens ahead of them as she spoke, her voice calm and level. "Corporate mercenaries," she said matter-of-factly. "They've been tracking us since we left the diplomatic station. I suspect they've been planning an ambush." An ambush. Marcus's mind raced as he thought through the possibilities. Mercenaries, highly trained, deadly, and motivated by profit, were the last thing he expected to encounter on this mission. But then, he didn't expect to be working alongside a Xerna warrior either. Lyra looked over her shoulder, her eyes briefly meeting his. "Stay close, Marcus. It's going to get messy. I promise you that." And just like that, the mission he thought he knew had shifted. The simple escort had evolved into something far more dangerous, and Marcus had no choice but to trust his instincts and his new, enigmatic partner as they prepared to face the unknown. The battle begins. The artificial gravity aboard the Aetheris hummed softly under Marcus's feet as he sprinted through the ship's metallic halls, the crimson emergency lights casting long shadows along the walls. Every step was deliberate, yet his mind was spinning. Mercenaries. They were the last thing he expected on a mission that was supposed to be nothing more than a diplomatic escort. But nothing about this mission, or Lyra Terran for that matter, was what he had expected. His pulse rifle was locked in his hands, the weapon cool against his gloved fingers as he followed Lyra through the narrow, winding corridors. He tried to focus, but his thoughts kept flickering back to her. How composed she had been when the alarms blared, her presence so commanding, so assured. She was more than just a warrior. She was a force of nature. And now, that force was about to be unleashed. Lyra's strides were swift, her every movement fluid and calculated. She was already 10 steps ahead of him, as if the chaos surrounding them had no effect on her. She turned to glance back, her eyes flashing silver. "Stay alert," she said with a slight nod. "The mercenaries are well trained, but they won't be prepared for us." Marcus swallowed hard, still processing the weight of her words. "You mean you?" Her lips curled slightly, the faintest hint of a smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. "You're going to need to learn how to fight. But for now, just follow my lead. We don't have time for hesitation." Marcus nodded, trying to steady his breathing as they neared the weapons bay. The tension in the air was palpable. Every door they passed, every corner they turned, felt like the calm before the storm. They were heading straight into the heart of the ship's security hub, and Marcus knew that once they entered the main combat zones, there would be no turning back. As they reached the weapons bay, Lyra punched in the access code, and the door slid open with a hiss. Inside, the shelves were stocked with an array of weaponry, from pulse rifles to energy grenades. Lyra didn't hesitate. She immediately grabbed a pair of combat blades, their handles glinting in the low light, and handed one to Marcus. "Your weapon will be your lifeline," she said, her voice steady. "Trust it. Trust yourself." Marcus took the blade from her, feeling the weight in his hand. It was a long, gleaming piece of advanced technology, its edge honed to perfection. He wasn't unfamiliar with weapons. His training had covered everything from handguns to high-powered rifles. But this blade felt different. It wasn't just a weapon. It was an extension of the person who wielded it. Lyra's confidence was contagious, and he could almost feel her presence within the weapon. Before Marcus could ask any more questions, the ship's AI voice echoed in his earpiece. "Warning. Enemy breach in Section 9. Hostile units detected. All security personnel to immediate combat positions." Lyra's eyes darkened, a low growl escaping her throat. It wasn't a sound of fear, but one of readiness, the kind of growl that came from an apex predator about to strike. Without another word, she motioned for Marcus to follow her as they ran toward the breach. The ship was alive with the sounds of chaos. Alarms blaring, the hum of energy shields coming online, the sharp crackle of distant gunfire. As they reached Section 9, the air felt heavy, thick with the promise of violence. Marcus's heart was pounding in his chest, and his breath was coming in short gasps. He had faced danger before, but nothing like this. There were no rules here, no structure. Just a fight for survival. When they arrived at the breach point, they found themselves in the heart of the ship's core, surrounded by several mercenaries in black combat suits. The mercenaries, with their faces hidden behind dark visors, were carefully positioned, their weapons aimed at various entry points. They were professionals, cold, calculated, and dangerous. But none of them had anticipated Lyra Terran. The moment she entered the room, everything changed. Lyra didn't hesitate. She moved like a shadow, her body flowing with inhuman grace. Her combat blades gleamed as she sliced through the air, cutting down two of the mercenaries before they could even react. It was all over in an instant. Marcus, though still adjusting to the chaos around him, instinctively raised his pulse rifle and fired, taking out another mercenary who tried to flank them. But even as the enemy fell, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. He glanced at Lyra, whose silver eyes were now glowing with an intensity he hadn't seen before. She was different, faster, more lethal. Her movements were almost unnatural, a blur of efficiency and deadly force. But there was something else, something more. One of the mercenaries lunged at her from behind, trying to subdue her with a quick strike. Lyra's reflexes were too fast. She spun around, disarming him with a fluid motion, and then slammed the flat side of her blade into his chest, knocking him unconscious in a single blow. Marcus watched in awe, his heart racing not just from the fight, but from something else, something he couldn't quite explain. There was a ferocity in her movements, a primal edge that made him wonder if she was more than just a skilled warrior. It was as if she had tapped into something deep inside herself, something darker. The last mercenary, realizing that he was outmatched, turned and fled, but Marcus wasn't about to let him escape. He leveled his rifle and fired, hitting the mercenary square in the back. The man crumpled to the ground, motionless. As the room fell silent, Lyra slowly lowered her blade. Her breathing was steady, though there was a predatory glint in her eyes. She looked at Marcus, a faint smirk playing at the corners of her lips. "You handled yourself well, Marcus," she said, her voice low but approving. "You're not completely useless." Marcus didn't know whether to feel flattered or intimidated. His pulse was still racing, and his hands were shaking slightly from the adrenaline. But in that moment, something inside him clicked. He had been trained for combat, yes, but this was different. This wasn't just a fight for survival. This was something far greater, a test of who he was and who he could become. "Thanks," he said, trying to steady his breath. "But what happens next?" Lyra's expression grew serious. "Now, we make sure this doesn't happen again. There are more mercenaries on board. We need to find out who's behind this and why they're targeting us. But first, we need to get back to the control center. I have a feeling this is just the beginning." As they moved out of the breach site, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into something far more dangerous than a mere ambush. Whatever Lyra had meant when she said, "This is just the beginning," he knew it was true. The mission was far from over, and the stakes had just gotten higher. Shadows of deception. The corridors of the Aetheris were eerily quiet now, but the silence was anything but comforting. The sudden chaos of the battle had left Marcus's heart racing, and the adrenaline still thrummed through his veins like a living thing. He followed Lyra down the dark, winding hallways of the starship, his footsteps echoing against the cold, metallic walls. Despite the deadly encounter they had just survived, a new kind of tension had settled between them, an understanding that there was more lurking in the shadows than either of them had expected. Lyra's steps were measured, her movements precise. Her body language spoke volumes. She was always on alert, always ready to act. Even now, after taking down an entire squad of mercenaries, she showed no sign of weariness. In fact, she almost seemed energized, as if the battle had only sharpened her focus. "What do we know about these mercenaries?" Marcus asked, his voice low, his eyes scanning the shadows around them. "Who sent them?" Lyra didn't immediately respond, her eyes flickering to the control panels on the walls as they passed, silently checking the ship's systems for any signs of further breaches. She was clearly scanning for more than just security information. She was searching for something deeper, something that would explain the unexpected ambush. "Nothing concrete," she said at last, her voice as steady as ever. "But there's something strange about the way they've coordinated their attack. They knew exactly where to strike. They knew our vulnerabilities. They were looking for something, or someone." Marcus frowned. The level of preparation displayed by the mercenaries was unlike anything he had expected for a routine escort mission. He had assumed they would be dealing with diplomatic tensions, not full-on combat. His hand instinctively went to his weapon, though he knew it wasn't likely to bring him any answers. Who would want to attack us, though? Marcus mused aloud. "We're just here to escort a few diplomats. Nothing special, right?" Lyra's gaze flickered to him, a spark of something ancient and knowing in her silver eyes. "You have no idea how much you don't know, Marcus Steele." The ship hummed softly as they neared the control center, the heart of the Aetheris. The air seemed heavier here, charged with an invisible tension. They moved in silence, both aware of the potential for danger at every corner. Marcus had never felt this exposed before, even during the most dangerous missions back on Earth. There was something about the vastness of space, the unknowns that it contained, that made him feel small and vulnerable. When they finally reached the command deck, Lyra motioned for Marcus to stay back as she approached the central console. She was quiet for a moment, her fingers dancing across the holographic interface with practiced precision. The lights above flickered in response to her commands, but Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The walls of the command center, lined with translucent screens showing data streams and security feeds, felt like they were closing in on him. "Whoever hired those mercenaries is trying to get to the Centurion delegation," Lyra said, her voice tense. "But it's not about them, at least not entirely." Marcus stepped forward, leaning over her shoulder to see what she was working on. The data on the screen was a blur of interstellar coordinates and encrypted messages. Nothing made sense. It was all too cryptic, as though someone had gone to great lengths to cover their tracks. "You're saying it's not just about the diplomats?" Marcus asked. "Then what is it about?" Lyra straightened, her eyes narrowing as she turned to face him. "There's something aboard this ship that someone powerful, wants. It's not just a diplomatic mission. This ship holds more than just an escort to the neutral zone." Marcus's mind raced. What could possibly be on board this ship that would make it such a high-value target? He had seen the Centurion delegates. Elegant, influential, but they didn't seem like they'd warrant this level of aggression. He couldn't understand it. Before he could voice his thoughts, an urgent beep interrupted the silence. Lyra's gaze snapped to the screen, her fingers flying across the console once again. Her eyes widened as she processed the new data. "We're not alone," she muttered. "More mercenaries. But they're not just mercenaries. There's someone else." Marcus's blood ran cold as he stepped closer, peering over her shoulder. The screen flashed with an image, a face, garbled by static, but the recognition was immediate. His heart skipped a beat. It was a human, but not one he knew. The face was barely visible, shrouded in shadows, but the eyes, they glowed a faint, unnatural blue. A chill ran down Marcus's spine as he watched the figure move through the transmission, the aura of danger around them undeniable. Whoever this person was, they were orchestrating the entire attack. The mercenaries were only pawns in a larger game, and that game was much more dangerous than Marcus had initially realized. "We need to find out who they are," Marcus said, his voice sharp with urgency. "They're here for something on this ship, and we need to stop them." Lyra's expression was unreadable, but the cold intensity in her eyes told Marcus everything he needed to know. "We're already too late to stop them from getting what they want," she said, her tone heavy. "But we can still make sure they don't get out alive." Before Marcus could respond, the lights in the control center flickered again, and the ship's AI voice crackled through the intercom. "Warning. Unauthorized access detected. Critical systems compromised. Security breach imminent." Without another word, Lyra was already moving, her combat blades in hand, her posture fluid and ready. "Come on, Marcus. The real battle is about to begin." Marcus had no time to argue. He fell into step behind her, his mind reeling from the new revelation. They weren't just fighting mercenaries anymore. They were fighting something far more dangerous, someone with a plan, with knowledge of this ship, and with a dangerous ability to stay one step ahead. As they moved through the ship, Marcus couldn't help but feel that he was being led into a deeper web of secrets. The mission had shifted again. What had begun as a simple diplomatic assignment was now a full-fledged war for survival. And as the shadows lengthened around them, Marcus realized that he was in far deeper than he had ever expected. And there was no turning back now.